we have every expectation that Roy Cooper, who quite frankly has never met a gun he wouldn't ban, is likely to veto this.
Welcome to Gun Politics and Freedom. I'm with Paul Valone. Paul, where do we stand with the PPP repeal today?
We're in a pretty good position at this point in time. Senate Bill 41 passed both chambers, passed the House last week. And the bill, as it stands, contains both the repeal of the Jim Crow era pistol purchase permit system and also the provision for closing the church carry loophole. Because, of course, although concealed carry is legal in North Carolina churches, it is not legal if they sponsor a school, at which point carrying a firearm becomes a felony. So I'm happy to say that at this point, Senate Bill 41 has passed both chambers by veto-proof majorities. And of course, that's important because we have every expectation that Roy Cooper, who quite frankly has never met a gun he wouldn't ban, is likely to veto this. I mean, there are some conjecture he might not. One of the bill sponsors, Senator Jim Perry, has said that it's possible that Cooper may not choose to die on this particular hill, metaphorically speaking. And so, in any case, what made us especially happy was that we drew 3 Democrats who voted for this bill in the North Carolina House. Because, of course, in the North Carolina House, we lack a veto-proof supermajority by 1 vote. And so consequently, either the numbers have to be right on a given day, or we need to draw the vote from at least 1 Democrat.
How confident are you that we can override this possible veto that the governor might put through?
Well, I mean, in the past, we've had a problem where we've passed this repeal before in the last session, the General Assembly. And we had a problem wherein a Democrat or several Democrats would vote for the bill initially, but then when it came time for the override vote, they would change their vote, perhaps due to pressure from Governor Cooper, perhaps because they never really meant it to begin with. But this time, I'm getting indications that it may just hold. For starters, one of the Democrats, Representative Shelley Willingham, has said that he will continue to vote to override anything he voted for on the initial run through. He seems like he's taking a fairly principled position. We're hoping he's right. Another one of the Democrats, frankly, was a co-sponsor of one of the provisions in the bill. And although he did vote against it when it came to the floor, this time he voted for it. So we are in a process right now of, matter of fact, shortly, automated phone messages and texts will be going into their districts to have people call them and thank them for the support of the bill and tell them to hold firm if Cooper decides to veto it.
I know we've worked for several years for the PPP repeal. This Jim Crow law has been around since 1919. How did GRNC create the political environment that made this possible?
Well, that's an excellent question, because GRNC has for 20 years been making the phrase "our Jim Crow era pistol purchase permit law" part of the popular lexicon. And now when you see it is generally referred to in that context. Although I did an interview with Dan Kane, reporter from the Raleigh News and Observer, who did his best to ignore this angle and pretty much discounted it because he claimed that nothing in the statute said that the purchase permit law was intended to be applied racially. But of course, anybody who says that either willfully or ignorantly doesn't know what a Jim Crow law is. Because essentially, after the war and violence in the South against blacks, we passed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution and ratified them, which respectively ended slavery, applied the Bill of Rights to the states. It incorporated, they call it incorporation doctrine. And then on the 15th Amendment, guaranteed their right to vote. So prior to the enactment of those amendments, the southern states have been using a series of black codes to do things like disarm blacks. We actually had statutes in North Carolina that disarmed both slaves and freedmen before the war. And so the passage of particularly the 14th Amendment effectively ended the black codes. And at that point in time, the U.S. government actually sent an army in to occupy the South, the so-called Reconstruction era, which continued until about 1877, the Compromise of 1877, which we don't really need to get into, but essentially Reconstruction ended in about 1877. And at that point began a backlash in which the previously Republican governments installed by the U.S. government in southern states were reversed. They went to Democrats. We saw the resurgence of the KKK, and we saw the resurgence of violence, including lynchings against blacks. But of course, they couldn't call it about race. The key to a Jim Crow law is that it's about race without saying it's about race. Because if they said it was about race when they were doing the debate over passing our pistol purchase permit law in 1919, as you correctly said, if they admitted it was about race, it would be unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment and could easily be struck down. So they left them racially ambiguous and simply applied them differentially. The classic example being the other Jim Crow law we're trying to repeal right now, namely the literacy test requirement of the North Carolina Constitution. It's unconstitutional, it can't be enforced, but it's still there. And they didn't say that they weren't going to let blacks vote. They simply said, we're going to apply a literacy test to do that. So
my own relatives came here in the 1700s from Ireland. And through the mid 1800s, there were advertisements that said no Irish need apply. So in my own family, I know about the discrimination of people that they just used nonsense to discriminate against people. And these are examples of those laws applied racially.
And as a matter of fact, as I mentioned to Cam Edwards yesterday, my ancestors were subject to those types of essentially Jim Crow-ish laws. I came from New York State originally, and in the early 20th century, New York State passed the Sullivan Law, which was very deliberately aimed at disarming Italians. So,
and this law came in exactly the same time period as the Sullivan Act did in New York. So
very true.
Now, again, GRNC is gearing up with a call campaign. I know the governor might not veto this bill, but might just let it sit in his pocket. Is that correct?
It's a possibility. He has had, because he stands a chance of losing a number of these battles, and that's politically costly to him. For example, there was a bill that just passed that's a Florida-style increase in penalties for rioting and civil unrest, and he announced that he was just going to allow that to lie on his desk for 10 days, which automatically becomes law, rather than signing it. But he decided, pardon me, not to veto it. Now, there's a chance he could do that with this bill, although, as I've said, I keep saying, Governor Roy Cooper has never met a gun he wouldn't ban. And so I think my personal feeling is that the ideologue in him will probably veto it anyway, but I guess we'll see.
Now, why did the NC Sheriff's Association reverse position and actually support repealing this?
That was a big win in the last session of the General Assembly. Essentially, after some discussions with then President David Mahoney of the Sheriff's Association, we determined that essentially our Jim Crow era archaic law, okay, which allows, once a sheriff issues you a pistol purchase permit, it's good for 5 years. And so somebody could take that permit, commit a disqualifying crime, and then get out of jail and use that permit to bypass the computerized National Instant Background Check System. It's archaic. And the Sheriff's Association looked at it, and we've improved our reporting of mental health records to the National Instant Check System. Clerks of Superior Court now have to report involuntary commitments within 3 days. We digitized all of our older criminal records from the 1980s and before, which had previously been on microfiche. And so we've brought our reporting standards for NICS up to the level that it now makes the pistol purchase permit law archaic.
So what's next? What's coming for GRNC? I know Keith Kidwell has a constitutional carry bill active, and
Yep.
I think there's some more bills that were even introduced last night. So what's coming?
One thing I neglected to mention is the provision under the purchase permit law, which essentially makes it a Jim Crow law, namely that it's discretionary. Back in 1919, when it passed, it was actually issued not by the sheriff as it is now, but by the clerk of Superior Court. And the clerk of Superior Court had to satisfy themselves at that point in time that the applicant was of good moral character, whatever that means. But I can pretty much guarantee that in 1919, it meant that the good moral character probably meant you were white. And in fact, we have a clipping we've been running from the Durham Sun at that point, with a headline saying most of the 450 people who'd gotten permits in the last 11 years were white, and that actually very few were black, and that the issuance had been restricted to, and that's the word they use, restricted to whites. And so that is the Jim Crow nature of this pistol purchase permit law. But to answer your other question, to get on to next, we're very optimistic for constitutional carry. That's something that is long overdue here. We've got 25 states that have passed it, and we believe it's time for North Carolina to do so as well. So that's definitely coming up. Within the next day or two, we will have alerts on the website showing people how they can both thank the 3 Democrats who voted for it in the House, and also because we had 4 Republicans who were not in attendance when they had excused absences when the vote for Senate Bill 41 was taken, and we want to deliver a pleasant message that they need to show up and be there on the override vote. So we'll have those alerts out in the next day or so.
And as you know, Paul, I like technology, and the other day, with the prompting from one of our other directors, I ran a Chat GPT artificial intelligence chat asking the system to generate some tweets in support of the Second Amendment, and it went off and did that. And then I turned around to say, would you generate 50 in support of gun control? And ChatGPT refused to do it for moral reasons. And I think that's pretty amazing when you think about artificial intelligence being that smart.
I find it both amazing and genuinely frightening, actually.
So that's Guns, Politics, and Freedom for this episode. Paul, thank you very much. We appreciate this update.
Thank you, Mark. Bye-bye.